We plan to have both candidates for Arizona Attorney General with us this morning in separate interview segments. But at the very last minute, just hours before this taping, Republican Attorney General Mark Brnovich canceled. Through a spokesman, Brnovich said he never agreed to be on a show with his Democratic opponent, January Contreras. For my part, the only agreement we had was that Brnovich wasn't going to debate Contreras. That was his request. We lived up to that agreement. Now, in case you're wondering, here are some of the questions I had for Mark Brnovich. The slogan in his first TV ad was, quote, "Experienced prosecutor, no politics." I wanted to discuss the evidence of his playing politics as the state's chief law enforcement officer. The most recent of several examples, he tinkered with the ballot description for Prop 127. That's the Clean Energy Initiative. The leading opponent of Prop 127 is APS. One of Brnovich's largest campaign donors is APS. The language Brnovich inserted echoes the language APS uses in ads fighting the initiative. We also would have discussed his successful prosecution of a lawyer who was shaking down small businesses all over the valley. It was a very significant case. That and many other things. Why am I telling you this? It's because in the 10 years I have moderated Sunday Square Off, no guest has ever ditched an appearance at the last minute the way Mark Brnovich did. Now, let's move on and meet the Democrat challenging Mark Brnovich. January Contreras is a former prosecutor, former Department of Homeland Security administrator, and a longtime aide to former Governor Janet Napolitano. January Contreras, thanks so much for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Let's talk about a lot of this. One of the issues dogging you in this campaign, the TV ads we're all seeing, they link you to a scandal at the Arizona State Veterans Home in 2007. Janet Napolitano was governor at the time. She fired the director after revelations of lousy care and allegations of nepotism. What was your role in all that? Because you're being criticized as having a direct role in how the scandal was handled.
Yeah, it's been unfortunate. I mean, I think it shows where we are in this election, that we're in a very close race. And so I think, Brnovich's allies are getting pretty desperate. This, the part of this that's serious is that we had care issues at the Veterans Home. And that hasn't only happened on Napolitano's watch. We had the same headlines under Governor Brewer's administration where Brnovich served. But we started, the Department of Health Services is who I was the liaison to in the governor's office. And so our role was to get that investigation done, make sure that corrections were being put in place right away. And actually, the director was eventually fired, but right away, some people on the ground were fired in the nursing home.
So DHS oversaw the Veterans Home, and you were a liaison from DHS to the governor.
So the Veterans Services Department oversaw the Veterans Home, and the Department of Health Services did audits, inspections, and licensing issues.
So here's some of the timeline issues. There were problems reported in January and February, and then it wasn't until March, I think that March of '07, the governor took action.
So,
and there's questions about when you knew, and some say it was February, a month before.
Absolutely. I mean, I believe the day that DHS had their initial inspection and realized they had issues to be concerned about is when they let me and the governor's chief of staff know. And
when was that?
That was in February. I believe it was the same day. And so I made sure I sent it back to our chief of staff and also a deputy chief of staff to say, here's what's going on. And DHS, the Department of Health Services, kept us updated.
So the January and February inspections that found problems never made their way to you or to the governor?
No, they definitely did to me. Same day is what I believe.
January and February?
I don't know about a January timeline. A February is what rings a bell, where as soon as we had notice in the governor's office, meaning me and Ellen and our chief of staff, then is when we started making sure everything's happening, right? And so what we had to make sure was that the Department of Health Services was allowed to do their inspection without any interference. And we had to make sure that the Department of Veterans Services, which I did not oversee, but was in communication with them, hey, you guys really need to take whatever recommendations they're giving you, because we have to make sure we're taking care of our veterans. And there's veteran spouses in the nursing home as well. Okay. And so all the steps that were taking place on the ground were exactly what needed to happen. And, we have highlighted a Rob article that said, on the ground, the actions to take care of our veterans were happening. And that's where my responsibility lied, less so in communicating with the press. That wasn't my job.
All right, let's leave it there, move on now. And you've accused Mark Brnovich of being very political in some of the things he does in that office. I've pointed out a few things. Are you saying you wouldn't be political? Because every attorney general is political in some way.
I think if you really look at our attorneys general in this state, ignore the last 7 years, you haven't seen much politics out of the AG's office. In fact, it's traditionally been above the fray, above the mud. I mean, Mark Brnovich is suing to take away health care from Arizonans, suing to eliminate the only guarantees that exist for people with pre-existing health conditions, suing with the mining industry to allow uranium mining on protected lands around the Grand Canyon. I mean, those are partisan or special interest agendas. And if he's willing to go after our health care, after our Grand Canyon, what is he not willing to go after to please these other folks?
So are you saying that you on your own or working with other attorneys general wouldn't sue the Trump administration over a policy you didn't like?
If it involves the well-being of Arizonans, of course we need to consider that. Healthcare is the prime example.
Well-being's a pretty big area.
Well, healthcare
it includes mining, it includes healthcare.
I mean, healthcare is a perfect example. We would absolutely be involved with litigation to keep protections for people with pre-existing health conditions on the books, because our Arizonans need that. And let's dissect this a little bit about how partisan it is, because it was our own Senator John McCain who was on the floor of the U.S. Capitol and gave that beautiful thumbs down to say, I'm not choosing politics over people. I am going to keep these guarantees for people with pre-existing health condition and access to affordable care, and I want to do the same.
Which suits would you back out of then, that Mark Brnovich has joined or filed?
Well, I mean, this healthcare one, we'd get out of it. We have no business attacking the healthcare of our people. Brnovich has us in a lawsuit in California defending the secrecy of donors to the Koch brothers network. That's unthinkable. And I'd ask you to think of a single attorney general in the history of the state who would do that with our taxpayer money, right? My grandmother won $100 at the casino. She donated it to me, this crisp $100 bill. She had to write her name, she had to write her address, and yet Brnovich is fighting so that these big donors in California and across the country don't have to say who they are. That's a real problem.
Let's talk about the consumer side of the job, because that's really the biggest piece. So Mark Brnovich has been a fairly aggressive attorney general in going after bad guys. What areas do you see for opportunity that haven't been touched yet?
Well, let's remember, there's hundreds of attorneys at the Attorney General's office. I was one. I was an assistant attorney general there in the criminal division. But we have all these attorneys who are always going to do good work. And so I'd say 90% of the press releases you see are going to be the same no matter who's the attorney general. Where it matters, that leadership is where we're focusing, what are we focusing priorities on? And it shouldn't be dark money donors. Now, in consumer protection, we can look at, for example, health care. That in fact we have other attorneys general around this country who are using the resources of their office to protect people's benefits that they're entitled to. Someone who may have been wronged by their own insurance company. When it comes to college loans, we had taken some step forward. The students who go to some private schools that then shut down or that otherwise were identified as these predatory private colleges. And, we need to be in that fight for our students, because they take advantage of people who have benefits. They take advantage of a lot of veterans, quite frankly. So we need to be there to hold those people to accountable and keep them honest. I mean, that's a big job of the Attorney General, is, we're the sheriff for honesty around the state.
All right. January Contreras, thanks so much for joining us. Best of luck in the election.
Thank you.